The Next Day podcast, episode 84 with Mikel
And Tanyka.
where we have conversation on different topics. So, we're doing our first episode on
Nope, nope. It's our third.
third episode of the Women History Month. Um, Basically, this is going to be based on our first prime minister, our first female prime minister of Canada,
hmm
and the other part is going to be
The
based on
first prime
history.
minister in the UK. Um, so that's what we're gonna be doing.
Yes, that's what we're going to be doing.
Which I think
So,
a lot of people probably know who the female prime minister in UK is, at least hopefully.
mhm.
Um, Canada I think will be new because I sure as hell didn't know about this at all.
Okay,
All
let's
right.
get to the episode.
All right. So we're starting with the first female Canadian prime minister. Um, oh, wrong notes. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so Kim Campbell, she was born on March 10th, 1947 in Port Alberni, British Columbia, is a Canadian politician who in June of 1993 became the first woman to serve as Prime Minister of Canada. Her tenure was brief, lasting only until November. So I guess if we'll get into it, I guess I'll see, but I don't know how things would have been. I guess if they were elected, maybe she was only in there for a year or a short time. I don't know, but we'll see. So Campbell was educated at the University of British Columbia. She got her BA in 1969, and at the London School of Economics, where she studied Soviet government. She taught political science for 6 years before returning to the University of British Columbia to pursue a law degree. Upon graduation in 1983, she practiced law in Vancouver for 2 years before devoting herself full time to a political career. In Vancouver, Campbell served on the city school board and was chair for a period. She ran unsuccessfully as a candidate of the Social Credit Party for the British Columbia provincial legislature in 1983, and in May 1986 was defeated in a bid for the Social Credit provincial leadership. In October 1986, however, she won a seat in the provincial legislature at the Social Credit as the Social Credit member for Vancouver riding. 2 years later, she left provincial politics and was elected to the federal parliament as a progressive conservative. In 1989, Prime Minister Brian Mulroney appointed her Minister for Indian Affairs and Northern Development. In 1990, she became Justice Minister. In January of 1993, was seen as sorry, well, what, no, sorry, let me go back up. Became Justice Minister and Attorney General. Her tenure was marked by several legislative successes, including strengthening Canada's gun control laws and passing a tough rape law. Her appointment as Defense Minister in January of 1993 was seen as a signal of Mulroney's confidence in her political future, especially when he announced his own retirement shortly thereafter. Campbell was selected by a party convention to replace Mulroney and became Canada's first woman prime minister in June of 1993. So she was only in there for, I don't know, math, eight or so months. In November, the Progressive Conservatives suffered a devastating electoral defeat. The party won only 2 seats, and Campbell failed to carry her own Vancouver riding, and she office the following left office. The following month, she resigned as party leader. Following her retirement from active politics, Campbell became a fellow at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. From 1996 to 2000, she served as the Canadian Consul General in Los Angeles. Afterward, she resumed her fellowship at Harvard, and from 2004 to 2006, she served as Secretary General for the Club of Madrid. Wow, a group she helped found, which includes former heads of government and attempts to enhance democracy throughout the world. She was active in various non-governmental organizations, including the International Crisis Group and the International Center for the Study of Radicalization and Political Violence. Her autobiography that she has called Time and Chance was published in 1996, if anyone's interested in reading that. But yeah, she had a very, very short tenure. Um, again, just from June to November in 93. And that was that. We haven't had a woman since, and I think we should. Um, so
Yeah.
that's, yeah, so that's the female prime minister of Canada. Um, so then we're going to move on to the first female prime minister of UK. And there again, they haven't had a female since, but she was in there a lot longer than ours. So let's
Mhm.
get to her. So Margaret Thatcher was born on October 13th, 1925 in Grantham, Lincolnshire, England, and she died on April 8th, 2013 in London. Was a British Conservative Party politician and Prime Minister. She was Prime Minister from 1979 to 1990. She was Europe's first woman Prime Minister, the only British Prime Minister in the 20th century to win three consecutive terms, and at the time of her resignation, Britain's longest continuously serving Prime Minister since 1827. Like, I always thought that Churchill was maybe there the longest, but I guess not. So that's pretty cool. She accelerated the evolution of the British economy from statism to liberalism and became, by personality as much as achievement, the most renowned British political leader since Winston Churchill. She was a role model for a later Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Um, I don't know who that is. So I
Mhm.
guess they have had female prime ministers since, so I'm incorrect. Um, but yeah.
Mhm.
So the daughter of Alfred Roberts, who was a grocer and local alderman, and later was mayor of Grantham, sorry if I said that wrong, and Beatrice Ethel Stevenson, Thatcher formed an early desire to be a politician. Her intellectual ability led her to the University of Oxford, where she studied chemistry and was immediately active in politics, becoming one of the first women presidents of the Oxford University Conservative Association. After graduating in 1947, she worked for 4 years as a research chemist, reading for the bar in her spare time. From 1954, she practiced as a barrister, specializing in tax law. That is boring law. Sorry.
Mhm.
In 1951, she married a wealthy industrialist, Dennis Thatcher, who was born in 1915 and he died in 2003,
Mhm.
who supported her political ambition. The couple had twins, a son and a daughter in 1953.
Mhm.
Thatcher first ran for parliament in 1950, but was unsuccessful despite increasing the local Conservative vote by 50%. In 1959, she entered the House of Commons, winning the quote-unquote safe Conservative seat of Finchley in northern London. She rose steadily within the party, serving as a parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Pensions and National Insurance from 1961 to 64,
Mhm.
as chief opposition spokesman on education from 1969 to 1970, and as Secretary of State for Education and Science from 1970 to 1974 in the Conservative government of Edward Heath. While a member of the Heath cabinet, Thatcher was only the second woman to hold a cabinet portfolio in a Conservative government. She eliminated a program that provided free milk to school children. Why?
Mhm.
Provoking a storm of controversy and prompting opponents in the Labour Party to taunt her with cries of, quote, Thatcher the milk snatcher. God damn it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
She also go ahead.
Maybe she believed that, milk helps you know, create strong kids, I
But she
believe.
took it
So,
away.
oh, she took it away.
She took it away. That's why they called her
Oh, I didn't
Thatcher
hear
the
that.
milk
Okay.
snatcher.
Milk
Yeah.
snatcher. Okay. So oh, right. Yeah, I would agree with you. I don't know why would she do that because,
Don't know why she would do that. I
yeah, it makes
mean,
no sense.
I mean, I think she's incredible in her own right. But again, just kind of watching, because I never watched the Iron Lady, which is based on Margaret Thatcher. Um, I never watched the movie, but kind of seeing her portrayed in The Crown, there was things about her or things about some of the things or stances. I'm just like, I'm not with you on that. Like that kind
Mhm.
of bugs me a little bit. Um, so I think she kind of sometimes made maybe what some people call the tough decisions
Mhm.
or decisions people wouldn't agree with, which is always happens in politics, but it's taking milk from school children.
Right.
What? And I think during a time, because I mean, during like the 70s into the 80s, maybe even to the 90s, England really suffered um financially. There was
Mhm.
there was their employment rate was really high, unemployment rate. And
Mhm.
to take something as maybe important as
Mhm.
milk from children during a time where maybe they can't get milk at home or they can't get food at home or whatever, right?
Mhm.
Is really a choice. And I don't know if I agree with it.
Maybe she has some type of childhood traumatic event that triggered her
Yeah.
back and possibly it might
Can't
be.
use your own traumatic events
Yeah.
dealing with other people, though.
Yeah.
We
I
all
agree with
have
that.
traumatic events,
Mhm.
whether small or big or whatever. You can't put your own traumatic events on other people. It's just that's unprofessional, in my honest
Mhm.
opinion.
Mhm.
But I think more so it was more to cut costs. That's what I'm thinking more of.
That too as well.
So,
Yeah.
um, so she also created more comprehensive schools introduced by the Labour Party in the 1960s to make rigorous academic education available to working class children than any other education minister in history, though they were undermined during her tenure as Prime Minister. After Heath lost two successive elections in 1974, Thatcher,
Mhm.
though low in the party hierarchy, was the only minister prepared to challenge him for the party leadership. With sorry, where am I? With the backing of the conservative right wing, she was elected leader in February 1975 and thus began a 15-year whatever, that would change the face of Britain.
Mm.
Thatcher led the Conservatives to a decisive electoral victory in 1979, following a series of major strikes during the previous winter, the so-called Winter of Discontent, under the Labour Party government of James Callaghan. As
Mm.
a prime minister representing the newly energetic right wing of the Conservative Party, the Dries, as they later called themselves, as opposed to the old-style moderate Tories or Wets, Thatcher advocated greater independence of the individual from the state, an end to allegedly excessive government interference in the economy, including privatization of state-owned enterprises and the sale of public housing to tenants. Reductions in expenditures on social services such as healthcare, education, and housing, limitations on the printing of money in accord with the economic doctrine of monetarism. Monetarism. That's a new one. and legal restrictions on trade unions.
Hmm.
The term Thatcherism came to refer not just to these policies, but also to certain aspects of her ethical outlook and personal style, including moral absolutism, fierce
Hmm.
nationalism, a zealous regard for the interests of the individual, and a combative, uncompromising approach to achieving political goals.
Mm.
The main impact of her first term was economic, which I think was probably very important. Inheriting a weak economy, she reduced or eliminated some governmental regulations and subsidies to businesses, thereby purging the manufacturing industry of many inefficient, but also some blameless firms. The result was a dramatic increase in unemployment from 1.3 million in 1979. That's a huge number, 1.3 million, to
Hmm.
more than double that figure in 2 years or 2 years later. At the same time, inflation doubled in just 14 months to more than 20%, and manufacturing output fell sharply. Although inflation decreased and output rose before the end of her first term, unemployment continued to increase, reaching more than 3 million in 1986.
Mm.
That's a lot of people out of work. Um, Thatcher embarked on an ambitious program of privatization of state-owned industries and public services, including aerospace, television and radio, gas and electricity, water, the state
Mm.
airline, and British Steel. By the end of the 1980s, the number of individual stockholders had tripled, and the government had sold 1.5 million publicly owned housing units to their tenants. Nonetheless, rising unemployment and social tensions during her first term made her deeply unpopular. Her unpopularity would have ensured her defeat in the general election of 1983 were it not for two factors. The Falkland Islands War that was in 1982 between Britain and Argentina over possession of a remote British dependency in the South Atlantic, and the deep
Mm.
divisions within the Labour Party, which contested the election on a radical manifesto that critics dubbed the longest suicide note in history. So really,
Mhm.
she maybe won her second term on technicality.
Right.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Um, so Thatcher won election to a second term in a landslide, the biggest victory since Labour's great success in 1945, gaining a parliamentary majority of 144 with just over 42% of the vote.
Mm.
Thatcher entered office promising to curb the power of the unions, which had shown their ability to bring the country to a standstill during 6 weeks of strikes in the winter of 1978 to 79, which I think they talked about in The Crown. Vaguely
Hmm.
remember that. Her government enacted a series of measures designed to undermine the union's ability to organize and stage strikes, including laws that banned the closed shop, required unions to poll their members before ordering a strike, forbade sympathy strikes, and rendered unions responsible for damages caused by their members. In 1984, the National Union of Mine Workers began a nationwide strike. So this is a crap load of strikes to prevent the closing of 20 coal mines that the government claimed were unproductive.
Mm.
The walkout, which lasted nearly a year, soon became em- embl- em- I don't know, problematic of the struggle for power between the conservative government and the trade union movement. Thatcher steadfastly refused to meet the union's demands, and in the end, she won. The miners returned to work without winning a single concession, and I'm sure that pissed them off. A terrorist bombing at the Conservative Party conference in Brighton in 1984, the work of the Irish Republican Army, IRA, nearly killed Thatcher and several senior members of her government. After battling Ken Livingstone's Labour-led London government, Thatcher abolished the Greater London Council in 1986. By the end of Thatcher's second term, few aspects of British life had escaped the most sweeping transformation of Britain since the post-war reforms of the Labour Party. Um, in foreign affairs, the Falklands War, we talked about briefly, was going on in 1982, illuminated her most significant international relationship with the Ronald Reagan, who was president of the States in between 81 and to 89. Um, Thatcher and Reagan, who together made the 1980s the decade of conservatism,
Hmm.
shared a vision of the world in which the Soviet Union was an evil enemy, which, well, I mean, deserving of no compromise. Well, and their partnership ensured that the Cold War continued in all its frigidity until the rise to power of the reform-minded Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in 1985. In keeping with her strong anti-communism, a 1976 speech condemning communism earned her the nickname Iron Lady, which that explains the title of the movie. In the Soviet press, Thatcher strongly supported the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and Britain's independent nuclear deterrent, a stance that proved popular with the electorate, given the Labour Party's repudiation of Britain's traditional nuclear and defense policies. In Africa, which some decisions she made when it came to Africa I didn't agree with, but anyways, Thatcher presided over the orderly establishment of an independent Zimbabwe, formerly Rhodesia. Didn't know that. In 1980, after 15 years of illegal separation from British colonial rule under a white minority, however, she encountered considerable criticism both at home and abroad for her opposition to international sanctions against the apartheid regime of South Africa, which that they talked about on The Crown. The Queen was not happy with anything that she was doing when it came to South Africa because she loved South Africa.
Mm.
Um, The second half of Thatcher's tenure was marked by an inextinguishable controversy over Britain's relationship with the European community. In 1984, she succeeded amid fierce opposition in drastically reducing Britain's contribution to the EC budget, European Community. After her third electoral victory in 1987, she adopted a steadily more hostile attitude toward European integration. She resisted federalist continental trends toward both a single currency and a deeper political union. Her traditionally pro-European party became divided, and a string of senior ministers left the cabinet over the issue. I mean, why are we hating on Europe? Aren't they not in Europe?
Mm.
I'm like, geography's not my strong suit, but I'm pretty
Mm.
sure they're in Europe. Like, why are we
Mm.
hating? Um,
Not
yeah,
sure.
me neither. Um, okay. Let me see here. So, so she did have a fourth term. So spurred by public disapproval of the poll tax and Thatcher's increasingly strident tone, conservative members of parliament moved against her in November of 1990. Although she defeated her most senior opponent, former Defense Minister Michael Heseltine, by 204 votes to Heseltine's 152, her total fell 4 votes short of the necessary majority, plus 15%, and she decided not to contest the election in a second ballot. On November
Yeah.
22nd, she announced her resignation as Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister, paving the way for her replacement by John Major 6 days later.
Mm.
So in retirement, Margaret Thatcher remained a political force. She continued to influence internal Conservative Party politics, often to the dismay of Major. And
Mhm.
Thatcherism shaped the priorities of the Labour Party, which she had kept out of office for more than a decade. She remained a member of parliament until the 1992 election and was subsequently elevated as a peeress for life to the House of Lords. I
Mm-hmm.
love these. I want a House of Lords. She continued to speak and lecture, notably in the United States and Asia, and established the Thatcher Foundation to support free enterprise and democracy, particularly in the newly liberated countries of Central and Eastern Europe. In 1995, she became a member of the Order of the Garter. So fancy. Following a series of minor strokes, she retired from public speaking in 2002, and then her husband died like a year later. It's really sad. Thatcher's daughter Carol revealed in her 2008 memoir, A Swim on Part in the Goldfish Bowl, that her mother had been showing symptoms of progressive dementia since 2000.
Mm.
And that is the end of Margaret Thatcher. That is the end of the first female prime ministers.
Hmm.
That's the end of this episode.
Okay. This ends this episode of the Next Tape Podcast, episode 84. Next Tape Podcast is available on all podcast platforms. We also have a website called Tanyka.
Next take podcast .podpage.io.
And where else are we at?
We're on Facebook and Instagram and Next Take Podcast and Twitter and TikTok and Next Take Pod. And we don't forget, we also technically have a Reddit, but we're doing a new one that's coming
Hmm.
soon.
Hmm.
And Mikel doesn't know about this yet. We have another social media thing called Blue Sky. It's kind of the new thing. That's shortly coming too. There's nothing on there yet, but
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
coming.
Okay. Sounds cool.
But by the
Uh,
time this comes out, it's already
hmm.
here. But anyways,
All right. You can contact us in an email at mikeltanika@gmail.com. That is mikeltanika@gmail.com. So, we talked about the first female prime minister from Canada, and also the first prime minister female from the UK. Um,
well,
Great
Europe,
stories.
all of
Hmm?
Europe. She's the first prime minister of all
Oh,
of
oh,
Europe,
my bad.
technically. Yeah.
Europe. My bad. Apologies. I keep mixing UK and Europe.
Well, I
Um,
mean, UK is in Europe.
okay, yeah, pretty
Yeah,
much.
but it wasn't just UK. It's actually just all of Europe, which is insane.
Okay, okay. So, all right. So, pretty interesting backstories on both of them. And basically, if you want to find more information, you know what I say, basically, just do your research into your local library or go to a bookstore, or you can search on the internet for these wonderful women who are leading different or certain types of countries. So yeah, um this is the third episode of our Women's History Month series,
Mm,
and I think we have
we have one more.
one more episode, I believe.
Yep.
As Tanika said. What would be the next one, Tanika?
We are going to be talking about Anne Burgess, who
Hmm.
I'm very excited to talk about.
Hmm.
She's similar to um our last episode, Galliv. She's very pivotal in her own right in that side of things. But again, there's a documentary on her, and for those people who loved Mindhunter, her character is the female in Mindhunter. That is the doctor. That's based on Anne Burgess, so I didn't know that before, and I'm like, oh my god!
Mm.
Yeah, it's incredible. So we will, and she's been talked about a lot lately
Hmm.
with the Mendez brothers and everything. She's been really talked about lately in the
Right,
recently.
right.
So we're gonna be Talking about her.
Okay. So I'm Mikel, and
And I'm Tanika.
we're out until
Uh, next week,
next week. Peace,
I
guys.
think.
All
Bye.
right.